You're listening to the Real Estate Runway podcast, powered by QUATTRO Capital, where we are all about alternative business and investment strategies to help you amplify life and maximize wealth. Here's your host, the recovering engineer turned multifamily investor, Chad Sutton.
All right, Real Estate Runway family. Today, we're going to have a very special guest on the show, Doug Howarth. This guy is a brilliant mind. Okay, so he is the founder of Hypernomics. He's an engineer like me. So you'll hear us talking a little in depth at times, but what's really cool about this thing is he's kind of, think about economics, and I use the word hypernomic. We're coming up with a new way, a new worldview of how to look at multiple aspects of a topic, boil them into a function that helps you understand it. So think about, what if you could put all the factors of property price into one model? Like I'm talking walkability score, proximity to downtown, age of the property, crime rate. You could put all of them into one model and create a predictive pricing model to help you figure out where you want to be buying and how you want to buy it. So super scholarly topic we have today. I'm excited to introduce him to you. Before we get into the show, if you get any value out of this or anything we do, scroll down, like, subscribe, share, just interact with the show and pay it forward. This way it will get to more people just like you. We do not advertise this show. All we do is share it and hope you will as well. Let's get right into it. All right. Real Estate Runway family, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Runway podcast. I'm joined today with Doug Howarth, founder of Hypernomics. I'm so excited to get into this topic today. Doug, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Chad, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm really excited about being on your show today. Thank you.
It's good to have you here. I can't say I wasn't intrigued when I was introduced to this concept and the fact that you were coming on this show. So we're going to have a great conversation today. But before we do, tell me a little bit about yourself. So what has your life history been like to get up to this date, and what led you to the concept of Hypernomics?
I worked 31 years at Lockheed Marti Skunk Works and on some very interesting topics. And while I was there, the background kind of noise problem that I had is I kept wondering why certain projects wouldn't be launched. The customers just wouldn't say that they were going to buy it. So that was kind of a background noise kind of problem that I had for several years. And then one day I went out with my wife to buy a washing machine, and of all things, and she's looking at the washing machine. She says, "I want more capacity than I have at home." So I thought capacity versus price. She's working a two-dimensional problem there. And then she says, "I'd also like to have more delicate cycles." I thought cycles versus price. So she's up to 3 dimensions. So we saw a machine we liked, and I saw the next one up the line cost more. And I said, "What about this one?" And she said, "It's too expensive. We can't afford it." And what I realized she was doing there, she was pushing us in part of the demand curve for this device. So it was quantity versus price. She just was working out a 4-dimensional problem in her head. And what I discovered was that the entire world's economy works out such problems in their collective heads and forms a network of ideas that actually you can describe mathematically. And that's what Hypernomics does. It describes how people value the products that are given to them and how they're limited by the amount of money they have in their pocket. So
yeah, it's very interesting. And I love hearing that you were with Lockheed back in the day. That kind of crosses paths with, my background at NASA and GE. We were bantering about that a little bit before the episode. So I can't wait to get into more of that. But let's look, we're on a real estate show. We talk a lot about commercial real estate. We talk about, the housing market. We talk about the capital markets and debt and things of that sort. Let's get into a little bit. I want to get right into this because this is a lengthy topic, and I think we're going to go pretty deep in it. Let's go into a little more detail about what Hypernomics is and how it may apply to real estate. How we can use that thinking to unpack a 4-dimensional problem.
Sure. Yeah, we've applied it to commercial real estate specifically in a couple of venues. So one is here, I'm in the Los Angeles area. So we decided to do a little experiment to figure out what the value of real estate was locally. So what we did was we looked at all the revenue by zip code that we have out here. And then we looked at the square footage that we had for properties. And then we looked at something called walk score. Are you familiar with walk score from commercial real estate?
Yes, and for those who aren't, it's quite simply a lot of different housing indexes use this, but it's how walkable is an area. You know, you might say somewhere in downtown Manhattan, super walkable. Somewhere in I don't know, let's just say Knoxville, Tennessee, where you have to have a car to get everywhere? Not so much.
Yeah. Okay. That's well described there, Chad. I appreciate that. So it worked out that in a certain part of LA that you could describe the value of the property by the income and the square footage. So if you take a look at make a, say, a office building, it's got 10,000 square feet in an area in which the average income is $100,000 per household. It works out that if you had a walk score of 45, the building would be worth about $4 million. But if your walk score jumped up to 90, it would more than double to just more than $8 million. And so knowing that going into this area, you'd want to buy real estate that would be undervalued with respect to its walk score and then develop that kind of real estate. So that's what you can use to your advantage here when you understand that there's several factors that roll into what the value of that real estate might be.
That's very interesting. And so let's talk a little more about the four-dimensional problem that is. So there's a
Mhm.
method you've got here. We're calling it hypernomics, and it's okay. I want to value a thing. I want to figure out the intrinsic value of a thing, and I've got to come up with, call it, four different metrics or four different
Yeah.
drivers.
Mhm.
How do you put them all together? You know,
Well, you start with your intuition. So, I mean, you've been in real estate a long time. You imagine that if you're going to value something, you're always going to be looking at price, which we would call maybe if you go back to your engineering terms, it'd be an objective function. You always want to figure out the price. And then in a commercial real estate, you'd say to yourself, well, I know that my intuition tells me that the bigger the square footage, the more it's going to be worth. And the more exclusive the area, the more it's going to be worth. So then you maybe say, well, I'm going to start to look at the income by zip code or their sub zip code. You can actually get that from some real estate sites. Then I'm going to look at the square footage, and then I'm going to look at how new the building is. And so now all of a sudden we've got the square footage, the local income. You want to look at how new the building is, what kind of shape it's in. You can quantify that too. You can go on and on and on. Like if it had more area, a grassy area around it, you could say it's got some more square footage around the base. You start gathering all these variables together and you put this into a software. So we have a software, that little plaque over there is for we have the world's first 4D software designed to analyze markets like that. You put all this stuff into a software. It could be this one, could be something else. And then you figure out what the value would be based on those features. If you've guessed right, you'll find that you'll start to get an answer that starts to neck into a tight distribution that explains what things are worth based on all those features. And that's what you want to be able to do. So your intuition serves you very well when you start out here, and you just keep adding other things that might appeal to your intuition about what is it you want to see. So for example, you may also have some, what we would call, like back in engineering days, a step function, something that differentiates one side of a product from another side of the product. So I'm sure in real estate, you heard the term being on the wrong side of the tracks. Well,
that's a good one.
here in Southern California, if you're in what's known as the Valley, which is the San Fernando Valley, you want to be south of the boulevard being Ventura Boulevard. If you're on the other side of the valley, which you're in Beverly Hills, you want to be above Sunset. And if you want to be in London, if you want to be in the financial district, prime commercial real estate area, you want to be north of the river. You want to be in the city, London City or someplace close to that. And so in London, these developers put up the largest building in London, known as the Shard. It kind of looks like a big pyramid, and they put it on the wrong side of the river. And what happened was they wanted to charge the prices that you could charge for being on the other side of the river. And so 3 years later, it took them 3 years to fill it up. A year after they opened for business, they had something like a 90% open rate on the spaces there. It took them 3.5 years to fill the location out. So you want to make sure that you're listening to what the market is doing by going out and do these analytics in advance. I think we've all seen these shows where people, I mean, my wife loves these real estate shows, Selling Sunsets, so doing this, doing that. And people snap these ideas up off of their head. Well, I think the price ought to be this. And a lot of times, because these people know the markets really well, they're pretty good. But the thing is that, as you know from studying distributions and things like that, there's a midpoint to the distribution, but you could be guessing high and you could be guessing low. So to go put into a residential thing that happened here back in 2010, a developer in Alpine, New Jersey. Alpine, New Jersey is the easternmost town in New Jersey. It's about 15 miles north of downtown Manhattan. This developer put up a house that had 30,000 square feet, and I think something like 25 bathrooms. And he put it on the market for $68 million. Now, our analytics said it was worth $25.3 million. So after he held it for 8 years, he dropped the price to $39 million. And then finally, a few years after that, he sold it for just about the price we posted several years before, adjusted for inflation. So he was holding this property the whole time because he hadn't taken the time to work out the right price for the piece of real estate that he was holding. So it turns out that you can overprice something or you can underprice something too. If you start to get a whole bunch of offers on a condo complex that you've built, you can probably wait and, if you have people overbid, maybe you can just take the overbids. But if you somehow underpriced it and took those bids, then you would be out that money. So the idea would be to try to find the optimal price point. And if you haven't developed something, figure out the optimal place to put something.
It's quite interesting. And when you start to explain it this way, right, the concept of hypernomics, it's really saying, okay, value is not contemplated by one metric or even two, right?
Right.
It's very easy to say, well, okay, what's my proximity to the metro center?
Mm-hmm.
Or what is we use walkability. What's my walkability? But when you really think about it, there are 4 or more, sometimes many variables that go into setting. And let's just talk about rental housing, right? What determines what an apartment will rent for, and you see rents for, 300 square foot studios that are $3,000 in Manhattan. And you see rents for, a 3-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Nashville that may rent for $1,000. It's very, very different. And you can't just say one specific thing. And so when you really look at these things, Doug, you're talking about, okay, any value that is contemplated, it's compared to what? The only way we can value things in this world, whether you're valuing, a washing machine, like we talked about, or you're valuing an apartment, or you're valuing a commercial real estate building, or you're valuing a spouse, dare I say. If you're trying to decide, well, how desirable is this spouse? You're comparing them to all the other potential spouses out there. And so what Doug is saying here, which is a very interesting way, my engineering brain is loving this. And if any other nerds out there like me or like me, you're nerding out too. Where, how do I figure out, okay, let's just think, what are the driving factors in rental housing? And just spitting off a few, I might say proximity to city center. I might say age. I might say finishes. I might say square footage. I might say walkability score. There's a number of things I can go into. I might even say, how many Starbucks are nearby. It could come down to a lot of that stuff. The interesting thing is none of us really have a good way to boil that all into a function. Tells you that kind of almost gives you a look of all the properties in an area, how they might relate to one another with all those things considered. And so that's really the concept of hypernomics. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right there, Chad. And the other thing you can do, Chad, is you can take, because real estate is pretty open and you've got all these MLS listings and everything, the ability exists to actually gather all this data together. You don't have to guess at what other people are charging. They're going to post that stuff up there. And to use your example back to New York City. So for example, if you've ever stayed in New York City, I've stayed a couple of times, and you can be up 30 floors up, and it can be tremendously loud. So like another thing might be, well, it's the proximity of this, proximity of that, how many square feet you have in it, but how soundproofed is it? Is it a nice place to be in? Is it quiet at night? Can I sleep there? And there are ways to be able to figure that out too. There's a lot of metrics that you can get. Most of the people in real estate already understand that intuitively. And they just need to gather these things together and stuff them into a model, and then see what the model spits out and tells them, well, that price, that's overpriced. This is underpriced. If I'm buying, I'm going to look over at this place here, and gives you ideas about how to do that kind of stuff so that you make the best business decisions for yourself.
That makes sense, Doug. And so I'm going to go off script a little bit because I think we're both able to kind of figure this out here.
All right.
So you mentioned that Hypernomics is the first four-dimensional software able to kind of help take, say, four different data points
Mhm.
on, a set of data and create something we can make decisions off of out of it.
Mhm.
So what I'd love to do is maybe think through, okay, how would Hypernomics, like how can I put the data into the Hypernomics software and what output can I get? And then similarly, to create value for the listeners, it won't be as good as using the software, but what is something someone could do, let's say in a spreadsheet, to start to make sense of that data in a similar way, if possible? It may not be possible, but let's
No,
try to
it's
go that
possible. I
section.
mean, before we invented the software, we actually did the analytics in a spreadsheet. For those of you who are deep into Excel, Microsoft Excel, which makes a spreadsheet, there's a function called linest. And what you can do is you can go into linest. And what you typically, to get a little nerdy about this thing, most functions in real estate, most value functions, we would call them, are what they call power functions, which means that they don't go up on a linear basis. So a 2,000 square foot apartment is not double a 1,000 square foot apartment. There's a tailing off there. So we use what's known as a power
And
function.
think about why that is, folks. Like even if you have a 100 square foot apartment, there's some basic things that still have value there. You have a bathroom, probably. You probably have
Mhm.
a kitchen. You probably, they may be small, but you still have basic things that are kind of fixed cost, if you will.
Right,
So
right.
anyway, continue.
So sometimes you can get by with linear estimates. In fact, it's pretty easy to do linear estimates with Excel. There are tutorials out there to tell you how to do it. And there would be tutorials to tell you how to do a power estimate, which is basically you convert the linear values that you have to logs and then do an estimate on that and then convert it back. But it's using basically some high school math and early college math if you can stomach that, or you can probably find a friend that would be able to do that for you. But that, if you put in typically take a column of available units, say if you're out there on a plate, then you put down what zip code they're in, then you cross-reference the zip code to the dollars that are per household in that area. Then you put in the square footage, and you put in how old the apartment is, and the walkability score. And all of a sudden now we just get put in about 6 variables there that if you run those in through this model and then hit enter, you're going to come up with what we call a value estimator for that real estate. And that what you would do is you go out and look at the stuff that is undervalued or overvalued. Now, so if you're trying to buy, if it's undervalued, you might say, well, is there another variable that I didn't consider? Like, for example, maybe you could actually find out number of places that have been cited for mold or rot or some sort of violation. You could try to add that column in there. But if the property is undervalued and it passes all these other tests, well, maybe that's the one for you then. You want to get the one that's the most undervalued so that you can get the greatest disparity between what they were charging, what you'll be able to charge for a rental on it. You want to be able to do that.
Nectar understands that raising capital is labor and time intensive, and we exist to solve that problem for you. Nectar provides fast, flexible, cash flow based financing for experienced rental owners and operators. Whether you need cash for acquiring properties, portfolios, or you simply need it for ROI generating renovations or expansion of staff, Nectar has your back. Grab your 12-month PNL with debt service and click the link in the show notes below to apply today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, folks, if you're into spreadsheets like me, I think you can probably go take that and mess with it. But again, what he's saying here is we have all this discrete data out there that can be used to approximate a function that
Mhm.
will help you figure out, how to value, a property. And when you're acquiring an apartment building, for example, or you're acquiring a self-storage building or a warehouse, we're all taught to look at the financials on it, right? And that's one data point. It's
Mhm.
one data point. You can try to value it on in place, but how do you know? And I think to quote Barbara Corcoran, her best real estate she acquired, she always paid a little too much for. Well, how do you know which ones to pay a little too much for? Right? Because you could get in
Mhm.
trouble like the guy who built the Shard or maybe bought the Shard. I don't know how that story
Mhm.
panned out, but if you buy
Sure.
it on the wrong side of the railroad tracks, The numbers may be fine, but you miss that piece of the equation.
Mhm.
You could be sitting in valuation trouble. This is another way to mitigate risk as you build your portfolios. And so coming back to you, Doug,
Mhm.
let's take it out of spreadsheet world. And for the rest of us who like to use software that is available,
Mhm.
and tools out there, let's talk about how the Hypernomics software would work in this situation if I'm trying to input said data.
Yeah, well, it starts with a spreadsheet. Usually starts in Excel. I mean, you build a database in Excel, and then you put it into the template that we have that actually conditions the data. So it makes sure that you call out the variable names in a specific way. So, for example, if you're using addresses, and an address would be, say, a character, and then if you wanted to have a price for something like that, and you put character over the price column, you would get an error there because it says that this is, well, actually, it would say it's a character, but you wouldn't be able to run it. So you'd have to change it to be a numeric value, floating or integer value or something like that, so that you can use it. So that this template conditions the data. Then you load the template into the software, and then the software will give you pairwise comparisons of, say, price versus square footage, price versus income level, price versus the floor that you're on, things like that. And then you, with this scatter plot data is, you take the scatter plot data and say, these seem to be the best correlated here. I'm going to test that, and I'm going to run a model. You ask the system to model it for you. And then it creates a mathematical model that shows the goodness of fit of your model to the data. And if it's, pretty good, maybe you stop there. But if you say it's good, but it's not great, then you try to add some other features in so that you can keep necking the error down until you feel like you're pretty comfortable with the results. And so the idea is typically to come up with a pretty good approximation, what you want to do first, and then keep trying to neck it down until you get really tight, as tight as it can be. And then you go from there and say, okay, here's my model. And now I'm going to take that model. I'm going to put it in my back pocket. I'm going to go out and survey the properties here, because there might be stuff you can't see in a number. Maybe, things have been sprayed with graffiti and you don't know that yet. That would be something that your model might not pick up. But the idea here is there's not a guarantee that you're going to get the best answer, but it kind of creates a map to push you to the right answer. So we like to talk about this as market mapping. It'll tell you the best place to go based on how other people have been working in the market, what they've come up against, and how you get the best outcomes that way.
Yeah, and folks, think about this as an actual data-based way, what a concept, to figure out where you should be buying property. All right. Let's go get to know Doug a little bit more in the Quattro questions. Doug, are you ready?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So, Doug, what is your superpower? Could be life or business, and how does it serve you well?
Well, I'd say my superpower is tenacity. I've been at this for 12 years, and the book got rejected multiple times. And I finally got the fourth largest publisher in the world to agree to write the book. And, the thing about hypernomics, you say you're starting with 4 dimensions, and people say, I don't know what that is. And so a lot of people just check out. Now, engineers such as yourself, Chad, they don't generally check out. I should tell you parenthetically here that engineers are the one group that uniformly get this off the bat, because engineers have to be mentally flexible. Interestingly, pure physicists only get it about half as often as the engineers do, because the physicists are always thinking in physical dimensions. These are mathematical dimensions. So when I talk about, the square footage doesn't go east, west, north, south, up, down. It's square footage. And so the tenacity that it took to come up with this is my superpower. I had 12 years of the company and numerous rejections of the book, and now we're just on the precipice of hitting it pretty big here early next year. That's when the book comes
That is
out.
wonderful. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, once the
Yeah,
book comes out. So I think this is going to lead us into the next question.
sure.
Let's flip the coin over. What's your biggest failure? Again, life or business, deal with choice, and what'd you learn from it?
Well, one of the biggest failures we had as a company was that we started out, interestingly enough, looking at engines going into helicopters and working out the value of the helicopter market. We had our first few jobs with a very large helicopter company, and they told us to build a database, which we expected they would pay for. And we poured thousands of hours of effort into this database because unlike real estate or the stock market, people try to hide what they're doing in the helicopter market. So you had to pull all this stuff together. I mean, it was a great learning experience to figure out what to do. But at the end of it, we didn't sell any of these reports, partially because people didn't know that they needed the reports. And so we've made the mistake of not getting the book out first before we tried to get a report that explained the principles in the book to people that needed it in their field. So my biggest failure was flip-flopping the order of things that needed to be done. And, it just basically stalled us for several years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes
Yeah.
in the market storytelling, it's like you have to simplify it to where a child or an executive would understand
Yeah.
it. And I put those in similar
They could be the same
buckets.
thing, right?
So- yeah, well, that's the attention span you're working with
Right.
sometimes. I get
Right.
it, recovering engineer here, folks. I apologize for that comment. But anyway, next question, Doug. So, here at Quattro, we're very keen on philanthropy. It's one of our 4 pillars, of course. And, I always love to give my guests an opportunity to just mention your philanthropic heart. Sometimes we have people give on your behalf in similar ways.
Sure.
So, where do you focus on giving, whether it's your time, your talents, or your treasures, to make the world?
Well, we give, to various local organizations here. We have some other ones that we pay to. But the other thing that I've done in the past, haven't done it recently. I'm in Santa Clarita, California. I joined the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Posse, which is a benevolent association that's trying to push the standing of the sheriff up. And interestingly, when you try to put on an event for a philanthropic purpose, it turns out that actually has hypernomics features that work with it too, which is to say there's a demand frontier for philanthropy. And interestingly, when we talk about this frontier, we're talking about how people respond in various income brackets and how many people are in each income bracket. And so one of the reasons we're not working with these people anymore, as I pointed out to them, that it works out that they would make far more money if they started to, instead of schmoozing with the most wealthy people in Santa Barbara, and there's a lot of them, if they started to move down the socioeconomic ladder, there's actually far more money to be had, below the millionaires than there is in the multimillionaires. And so it's interesting that this phenomena extends to that realm, and you can use it to optimize your philanthropic endeavors. So, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, Doug.
Yeah.
And so going into, last question here, what is the best way to get in touch with you to learn more about Hypernomics, find the book that's coming out soon and really dig in?
Well, you could write me directly at D Howarth, that's DHOWARTH at hypernomics.com, HYPERNOMICS.com. Go to our website, hypernomics.com, and you could go to my personal website, DougHowarth.com. And the websites, you could find a bunch of blogs that actually break down everyday situations to get very pithy examples of how hypernomics works in the world all the time. So that would be a pretty good introduction to that. If you didn't want to spend the time to talk to me directly, just read the blogs and you would be able to figure out, well, hey, this stuff does work and I could use it here, here, and here.
Yeah, folks. And look, scroll down in the show notes of whatever platform you're listening to this on. That'll be right there for your clicking pleasure. So no need to write any of that down. It'll be right there for you. Doug, thank you for coming on the show, sharing some of your brilliance in the form of hypernomics. And we cannot wait to hear how the book launch goes and hopefully get a copy of that ourselves and dive in, maybe have you back on here.
Okay. I appreciate it, Chad. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Chad.
Do you manage multiple legal entities? Is your data scattered across various unsecure systems? Is your team spending too much time on manual processes? Do you struggle to meet reporting deadlines? Simplify entity management and compliance with Entity Keeper. Entity Keeper helps easily manage entities, build and maintain complex organizational charts, and track filing deadlines, all in one secure, cloud-based platform. And with automated alerts and centralized document storage, you'll stay 2 steps ahead of compliance deadlines. Click the link in the show notes to learn more and book a demo.
All right, team. I hope you really enjoyed the show today. It was a very technical topic. Hypernomics is something that is going to be taking the world by storm. I'm excited to have one of the first looks on a podcast anyways, of having this topic out there. And I hope that at least some of the value that Doug shared will help you start to think about how you can understand your real estate markets better. how you can understand how to price real estate better and make sure you're buying in the right areas by looking at the right metrics, all boiled together in one. Check out hypernomics.com for more information. Folks, if you get any value out of the show or anything that we do, like, subscribe, share, just interact with the show. That is the only way we get to more people just like you. So please do that, pay it forward. Until next time, this has been another episode of the Real Estate Runway Podcast. Over and out.
We hope this episode was insightful and brought value to your day. If so, please be awesome and leave us a 5-star review. Find out how Team Quattro can help you at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this is the Real Estate Runway Podcast.